Om Anyana Timrandasya Yananjala Shalakaya Chakshudunmilitamyena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Gurudev, everybody. Good morning and or good afternoon in some countries. Today, the topic is going to be the illusion of loneliness. And I heard a beautiful saying from a poet when I went to live with the homeless on Venice Beach. And this was back in 1988. And he said, just because you can't see my home doesn't mean I'm homeless. Just because you can't see my heart doesn't mean I'm heartless. Just because I'm alone doesn't mean I'm lonely. And that is the key to all of it. As long as we are looking outside at the outside circumstances, we're going to struggle. We're going to feel alone. And the fact is, the best friend in the world is inside, is in your heart. So Narayana, which is the ultimate consciousness, is everything. So he's in all of the, the solid things that you can see around me. He's in me, he's in you, he is in everything. But we make the mistake of forgetting that and staying projected outward. So by projecting outwards and being attached to the reality he's created, that is what's called Maya. So these things are not Maya, but our attachment to them and us thinking that they are everything, that is Maya. That's where the confusion comes in. When we understand that everything is Narayana, then you realize you're never alone. We're all like swimming in this beautiful pond. I have a visual that comes to me every night when I lay down. I feel like Guruji has created a giant cloud, and that's where we all sleep. So at night, I just drop down into this beautiful white fluffy cloud, and I see all of us, friends, enemies, everybody, and Guruji's just embracing us. It's like, come back home. You had a great day. Some of you were more balanced than others. Some of you were wackier than the others. But we still all come back to that huge protective cloud at the end of the day that is him. And I think whenever I've been isolated, that's actually when I have felt, whenever I've been isolated, I've actually felt calmer and more peaceful. And I know in these days, it's hard to attain that because we're so distracted. We're so directed outwards with, we're on our cell phones. We're constantly on social media, and it makes all of your projections go out. And that's where this deep, deep emptiness settles in. And they're finding there's a very high depression rate now among kids who've been brought up on social media, because they're looking for all the rewards out there. How many friends have they got? How many people like their post? All of it is directed outwards. And, the analogy for me is, say you've been pining over a lover forever, and finally you go out on a date and you're on this beautiful date and you spend your whole time on the cell phone. And you don't even look at your date, right? That's kind of what we're doing by running through our life looking this way instead of always being connected to the one in your heart. And you still go about your day, but what I learned to do is just pretend I was on a date with my best friend in the world. So if I was alone looking at the mountains, I'd say to my date, isn't this beautiful? Isn't this something? And I would always feel a rush of acknowledgement. So the more you keep that conversation going, keep your inner dialogue going with that source, Narayana, and then you feel like you always have someone with you. And the loneliness only comes when you forget that. When you think that just because you're alone in a city or in your life, and now with the COVID, people are desperately alone. right? People are just beside themselves, thinking they're lonely, and so they're scrolling social media, they're trying to find TV shows, and all of it is just making them feel emptier and emptier and emptier. Excuse me. So there's a great YouTube video that Guruji gave, and it's just a short clip, and it's called "Why Do People Feel Isolated on the Spiritual Path?" And so this is a slightly different topic than loneliness, but it is something that happens once you start on the path, that feeling of isolation. And he says, if you are on the spiritual path, there is no time to feel isolated because there are so many things to do. But if you're not doing anything and you're lazy, then you will feel lonely, and then you will feel isolated. So he says the spiritual path is an isolated path because it is just you and the divine. Nobody but God will understand you, and you will never find what you're looking for on the outside. So you must take time to be isolated, change your attitude about it. And he says, when you're first on the path, the mind goes through a state of confusion because it doesn't want to submit itself to that control. The mind wants to control everything. So when you sit down and say, you're not in control, I'm going in, it is going to hurl stuff at you constantly. It's going to try and keep saying, oh, you should phone this person. Oh, you didn't get invited to that. This is a problem, that's a problem. And that's your mind trying to keep you under its influence. And the more you do the different techniques that we've been taught, the different sadhana, and most importantly, the japa, chanting the Lord's name, because whenever you realize the mind is starting to depress you, start chanting. You have, and controlling the mind, it's like controlling a puppy, right? If you've gone through your whole life without training it, it thinks it can do whatever it wants. It can eat the toilet paper and chew up the rug. And so you have to start training it. And that's why repetition is important. The more you shut it down by chanting japa, Om Namo Narayanaya, Om Namo Narayanaya, then it will finally get the hint and be still when you want it to be still. And I remember struggling with that and thinking, this is never going to end. It's just going to keep yelling at me. And finally, it stopped. It realized it was a losing battle. And people say, when you meditate, how long does it take you to settle? Well, it doesn't take any time at all now. It used to. I used to have a notepad next to me to write things down because it wouldn't shut up. It kept reminding me of things. And now, as soon as I close my eyes, it's absolute stillness. So it is a real goal. It is a real possibility. And the more you learn to be still every time you close your eyes, the less you feel lonely. And, Narayana has kept me on the move my whole life. I've always been nomadic, and I always tried to put down roots like everybody else was, and it never worked. And I kept finding myself constantly hurled back out into the world. And a lot of those stretches of time I was on my own, but I literally learned to feel exhilarated every time I was on the move again. And I could almost hear cheering in my head, like, yay, the next adventure is starting. So it became very clear to me that there was no loneliness. And it was interesting because my son decided when he graduated high school, he wanted to go and have adventures. He'd watched me and he thought, I'm going to do this. And so I just bit my tongue because he was young, looking for his age, and he was only 19, and he took off and walked and hitchhiked through Mexico, Central and South America. And I kept, calming myself down and not having anxiety attacks. And when he finally came home after this grand adventure, I asked him if he ever heard advice in his head. And he kind of looked at me and said, yeah, I did. What do you know about that? And I said, well, that's how I've gotten through, is I wait and I try to shut down the chatter. until I have a very clear advice about what to do. And that happened to him traveling alone. And it kept him from feeling lonely because he felt this presence constantly saying, if he'd meet a stranger and the stranger would invite him, you can come stay at my place. If the inner voice said no, he wouldn't. And other times, it would say yes, and he'd go stay with a lovely family and have a great time. And he never, ever got into trouble. That whole year-long trip, nothing ever went wrong. So, and he hadn't done a lot of spiritual practice per se. He'd always meditated. And he started meditating with me when he was 3 years old through the Self-Realization Fellowship, Yogananda's organization. And so that's a great gift you can give kids or grandkids, is if you let them sit in your lap while you're meditating, they learn about stillness because they feel it from you. And as a result, they don't feel lonely, right? They learn how to feel the presence by being quiet. And the other thing that Guruji suggested for, overcoming any of that sort of empty, isolated feeling is he reminded us that there are things we can do in life where we lose our sense of time and place. And it's something artists do, writers, creative people go into a state where they sort of forget about the world and the art comes flowing through. And that is something that everyone has the ability to do. Even if you're not a creative person, if there's something you love to do that takes you away, nurture that so that when there are times like COVID where we're constantly being locked down, remember those things, even from your childhood, go buy sidewalk chalk and draw on the sidewalks, or just throw on music and dance. And I love that Guruji encourages singing and dancing, because really, if you do a good 20 minutes of wild, chaotic dancing, you're not going to feel alone. You'll just feel exhilarated and happy and alive. And that's a gift. That's all we can give back to the divine, is to show we're having a good time, to not be all mopey and whining and, feeling sorry for ourselves. If we can just find ways to be exhilarated no matter what. And there's a group of ladies here in Calgary that are adorable, and they're all ages, but it goes right up into women in their 90s. And what they do is they knit scarves for the homeless. So they knit all year long. And then one of the women gathers all these scarves together and takes them down to the drop-in center. And the homeless are actually allowed to pick out the color they like. So they're not just shoved at them. They actually get to shop as if they were a regular person and pick out a beautiful scarf that they love. And these women, a lot of them are living alone. They're widowed. And they put on their old swing tunes, their big band sounds, and they knit. And they knit scarves for the homeless. And you would think that these women would be suffering from depression in that kind of state. And they're not, because they're doing something they love and they're being of service. And that's another thing that will snap you out of loneliness in a second, is if you can find a way to be of service, to, drop something off. There's a group here that I'm supporting, and they had been providing bag lunches for kids who were low income. So a lot of these kids wouldn't eat lunch if they didn't get a bagged lunch at school. Well, school's not in. Everyone's being homeschooled. So what's happening is people are still putting together these bag lunches and getting them to these kids. And in some cases, this is the only meal these children are getting. They're very, in very low poverty situations. So there's always something you can do. And as Guruji said, the one thing that will make you feel lonely is laziness, right? If you just mope and become a couch potato, you are going to feel alone. So the whole trick of it is show God you're grateful for this life and do something. Do something creative, fun, laugh, get on the phone and talk to people who are shut-ins, who have no communication, and just spend some time talking to them. There's so many things you can do. And the more you interact with people in any, facet, the more you are expanding on your spiritual path, because it is all about service. And I remember reading an account about Sri Aurobindo, who was, way back, but very enlightened master. And he had quite a school around him in an ashram. And he finally decided that he would progress faster alone. And he took off, I guess, to an island with the woman who was his main disciple. They just called her the mother. And a friend wrote to them and said, wow, you guys must be in heaven. You get to spend all your day on your spiritual practice. And he said, actually, we've gone the other way. It's been hell. And they realized that it was the community that kept them progressing upwards, and that when you disconnect from the community, you actually take a nosedive. And it's almost like a trampoline, right? You can only jump as high as the trampoline. And the more your community becomes a higher and higher trampoline, the higher you can jump from there. But if you're just jumping alone, then you're limited. You're only ever going to be able to reach a certain height when you're on this journey solo, as a solo artist. So even as Guruji said, the path is just you and God. But by staying connected to other people and helping them shine and helping be of service to them, you won't have time to feel lonely. You will constantly feel that you're part of this giant, beautiful cloud that is our reality and is our consciousness. And I realized one gift I had when I was young was, in a weird way, our family got this broken down house in the middle of the richest community in Calgary. So everyone else was oil company executives and they belonged to all the expensive clubs. And here we were in this rundown, old turn of the century house. But my dad was a contractor and he saw a gem. He saw something that could be restored to its original. I think it was 1898 was the date of the house. So it had the high floorboards and plate rails around the walls and very high ceilings. And so we had no money. Dad was constantly renovating, and on vacations, he just took us to the mountains and we camped in tents. So I'm envying all these people who were going to Disneyland in Hawaii and could afford all these big trips. And just recently I heard a saying when I was in India. It said, if you want to destroy someone, give them a life of luxury. And sure enough, that's what happened by me being in the mountains and learning to be still. Like we would literally go days just barely grunting at each other. Everyone knew their chore and who was cooking and who was cleaning. And we could go through whole days without speaking to each other and we felt fine. And now that I'm back and I'm meeting people who kept staying in these very wealthy environments, the clubs, the cabins at the lake, and the mental problems they're dealing with are immense because they never knew how to be still and how to be rewarded by going in. They always had to have outside rewards. And so now they're freaking out. They don't know how to live isolated. They don't know how to live just being still and connecting with God. And the best way to call it is just the presence, that the more stillness you have, the more this presence just erupts in you. And like before these sessions, I get jolted awake at 3 a.m. and it's just this rumbling going on. And I have to do, my Babaji Surya Namaskar, I do my puja, I do the 108 names, and it finally settles enough that I can speak to you. But it's like Guruji going, get up, get up, get up. I want to talk to my friends. And when you start realizing that, then nothing compares. You look forward to the lonely times. You look forward to the times of being away from people and just feeling that immense love and that immense presence. And that's why I named this the illusion of loneliness. You are never alone. You're only so busy on your cell phone that you're not looking at your date, right? You always, always have that presence with you. And when I was going through some really screwy times down in the States, some of you read my memoir, I felt this presence every time something crazy was going on. I became very still and I would hear this voice going, do you see? Do you understand? And I realized I was being given this kaleidoscope of the human condition, that it was like, look at this. Do you understand what you're seeing? And whether it was high-powered Hollywood executives or it was the homeless on Venice Beach, I knew that something inside me was showing it all to me so that I could understand it's all a Leela, that none of it is serious enough to take me out. The only relationship that could ever affect me is the one with God, is the one with the ultimate that created me. That is the only one that matters. And so you look forward to those times alone because that's when you get to commune with that presence. So something that they teach in the Bhakti Marga Academy is that there are 4 life goals for everybody. And it's Dharma, which is the righteous action, Artha, which is seeking wealth, Kama, which is desires, and Moksha, which is liberation. And what you're seeing now with Kali Yuga is most of the world is looking for the middle 2, wealth and desire. They've completely forgotten righteous action and liberation. So be careful that you don't forget. There are those 4 life goals, and they're not saying try to stifle yourself, but they're saying remember that righteous action and liberation are just as important as wealth and desire. And the more grace you attain, the more you focus on the divine, the fewer your desires, and the wealth just keeps coming. There's no way to explain to somebody who's caught in the material world that, like, I'm staying in a $2 million estate and I'm a sannyas. I have nothing. So according to the banks, I'm a credit risk because I have nothing. But Guruji keeps putting me in spectacular places. And the people who put me in this place had never met me. They just heard about me. So this is when, Guruji's just putting ideas in people's heads, going, why don't you take care of her? Why don't you, get that person in? And that's how you shift your context. You stop looking at the material world first and then God when you've got a minute. You always look at God first because that's the one who's making the travel reservations and booking your places and getting money to you. That's where it's coming from. So you keep your focus on whatever you picture as God in your heart. If it's not Guruji, if it's you've got an Ishtadev, if it's something completely different, Buddha, Jesus, it doesn't matter. Whatever connects you to the divine is living in your heart. And that's what you stay focused on. And then you will never, ever be alone. And Guruji did an interview recently. Some of us saw it was on German TV on December 17th. And he says, where there is love, there is God. This is your security during these times. Let it take over. And after one of the darshans that Guruji gave, he talked about the importance of stillness. So stillness is not loneliness, right? Stillness, he says, our mind is always wandering around. Our mind is always jumping. One has to be in a space of quietness and stillness. That's where your heart can blossom. So find the things that put you into that stillness. whether it's painting or knitting or just doing your japa or painting rocks. It doesn't matter what it is. These are just tools for you to go into stillness. And sometimes just putting on great music, and it doesn't always have to be kirtan, right? All music is inspired. So whatever music takes you away, put it on and just sit and be still, or do something creative, but you will never ever feel alone if you remember that you have all of these beautiful, and you have a functioning body to do it. Like, just imagine the people who are handicapped, who don't have the option of doing what you can do. So be creative, be of service, and there won't ever be loneliness. And Guruji's final quote here is, "You are all aware that the purpose of human life is to realize the greatest goal, which is the true self, the divine love. This love, which seems so far away for the mind and sometimes even seems inaccessible, is actually the closest thing to you." So, Jai Gurudev.